Now, I didn't bother sanding the inside of the copper ring because it's going to be over the silver ring, but I will sand the outside so I get the solder basically invisible. We want the finest line still visible. We don't want any solder visible on top of the ring. So I'm just sanding with the sanding stick and 400 grade paper, following the curve of the ring. So we want the whole ring to be the same thickness. So once you get the solder, go ahead and go around the rest of the ring. You can leave the hammer marks in if you want, but be sure you keep sanding until you don't see any more silver from the solder. Take your time, do it right. So once you get your copper ring tidied up to the look you want, slip your silver ring out, anneal this, and then pickle it. So just bring this up to a dull red. Annealing is not soldering. You shouldn't melt your solder if you do this correctly. What you can do is you can put a little drop of flux on it and just heat it up until the flux goes clear. And then that is the annealing temperature, and stop. If you continue heating a few seconds after the flux goes clear, your solder will flow, which is not what we want. We want to keep the temperature just below the solder melting temperature. So quench this now and pickle it, or if you want this dark color, leave it. So you could just let it cool to air temperature without quenching it. Up to you, but to get a nice shiny finish, you need to pickle it and then polish it. So now we need to measure the outside of this in a couple of different places. So mine is 21.4. I know the height of the material I'm using for the outside ring is 1.33. So you add that, multiply by 3.14. Now, when you get that length, add about another 1.5 millimeters to it. So that'll make sure that it's bigger than this and it'll spin. If you make it the exact size, when you flare this, it won't spin anymore. And that's okay. I mean, it's just a different look, different concept. But if you want it to spin, make it 1.5 millimeters bigger. Cut your small ring to length. Once again, use your number 2 cut flat hand file. File the ends, and because I rolled this through the rolling mill to get my profile, you need to anneal it. Even though it's small wire, it's too hard to work efficiently. So anneal it, form it, and we'll solder it. So after you anneal your metal, it's usually a good idea to just check it to see if it's malleable. If you bend it and it stays bent, if it bends easily, then it is. So once again, half round shape on the inside so you don't mark the metal. Get the ends lined up as perfectly as possible and hard solder. So every piece of soldering on this has been hard solder. So get the fit of the join as perfect as possible. Flux top and bottom, And I'm just going to use one small piece on this because it's a small ring. And I'm going to heat from underneath. Place the solder on top. And when the solder flows, give it about a second and then take your flame away. If the solder doesn't go where you want and you try to shift it with the flame, you'll just melt the piece. So don't do that. You can push the solder around with your solder pick, but you don't have a lot of time to do that. It's usually easier to back away, use another little piece of solder, and place it on it. So you can see the solder flowed through, and there's just a little bit on top to clean up. So we'll pickle this and then tidy it up, and we're ready to assemble the ring. So we're out of the pickle, dry the ring off, round it up on the ring mandrel with your rawhide hammer. Flip it over. Now this one is a bit like a potato chip, so we're going to have to straighten it out. So I'm just going to put the ring sideways on a steel block, put another steel block on top, make sure it's level, flip the ring over, do it again. Now we've taken our little wave out and we can tidy up our solder, and once again 400 grade paper on the sanding stick. Just follow the curve, and we only want to sand until the solder is gone. And once again, we don't want to see solder because this is brass. It will oxidize within a couple of days, and if there's solder on there, it'll be a blemish in the metal. So sand it right back so there's just the finest line where your solder joint is. Check that your last ring fits over the first two fairly loosely. You don't want it a giant amount, otherwise you'll have to flare this too much to hold it in place. So polish this now because we're ready to assemble. So you can see I've placed my ring on a little steel block and I'm using a doming punch. Make sure that the punch is straight up and down. So we're just going to flare it, slip the ring over, and make sure that it's flared enough to hold the ring. So you can see it is just. So we're going to flip that over, flare the other side. And we're just going to work it back and forth a little bit to make sure that it's the way we want it. And we don't want to flare it enough that the outer ring doesn't move. So this one still moves quite nicely. And that's it. The ring is done. Fits perfectly. This moves enough to annoy your neighbor. And we have, for this one, we have a dark outside, the brass, and a polished satin silver finish on the inside. So another beginning. Use your creativity with this one. Ciao.